So here's one easy option to get going. This is an easy crop for your windowsill. It's just a little milk carton cut off. I'm gonna already put a few decent sized drainage holes through the bottom of that. So I've got a nice crumbly compost mix here. This is not the greatest compost mix, it's just a standard multi-purpose one, but I've sieved it well to get rid of any big chunks of debris out of it, and just to give it a nice crumbly kind of texture there that you can see. And so we're just going to fill that pot up to a decent depth. So you can see there, it doesn't need to be all the way up. I'm going to do this as a kind of cut and come again lettuce crop on the windowsill, so it doesn't need a ton of soil right up to the brim, but it just needs a decent depth. So if you want to make sure there's no kind of air pockets in that, just so that when the seeds germinate and the roots come through, that they have a good contact with the soil. So having done that, just give it a wee press down, make sure there's a nice firm kind of seed bed there for the seeds to go on. So got this one. This is just a pretty bog standard seed mix. You can get these ones pretty much from any supermarket. Just a kind of lettuce mix, cut and come again kind of variety. So should germinate fairly quickly, should start to grow quite fast. And if I have it on my kitchen windowsill and nice and warm there, I'll like it. I can keep a close eye on it every morning, just make sure it doesn't dry out. Also don't want it getting too wet. Now lettuce seeds are super fine. Okay, so it's pretty easy to sneeze and lose all these all over your garden or your greenhouse if you're not careful. So you don't need a lot of these. You can sow them quite thinly. So I'm just gonna sprinkle a few just carefully across the top of the compost that we've prepared there already. Let's put a few more in. There we go. Let's see, that should do the trick. So let's put the rest of them carefully back into the packet. Of course, you could just use this to start your seeds off in. And by that I mean that now that we've got a good sprinkling of seeds in there, once they started growing and they had a good, maybe a couple of, beyond this, once the first leaves that come out are called seed leaves, and we don't necessarily want to transplant them at that point or pot them on. But once what's known as the true leaves come out, which is first kind of couple of like big leaves, first seed leaves are just to get the plant to that point where it can start photosynthesizing a little bit, and then it kind of produces what they call the true leaves, where it really kind of kicks in and it starts producing a lot more energy for itself. At that point, once they're a wee bit more robust, then you can pot them on. So we could use that, separate these out, put them into separate pots, grow them on a bit more, and then get them ready for transplant into the garden once we'd hardened them off. However, for this one, I'm just going to try, see if we can get a decent sort of depth of leaves on these from all these ones, quite tightly packed. You wouldn't normally pack them that tight if you were growing them outside. The closer the plants are, the more they compete with each other, so typically the smaller they'll be. However, some crops are a bit more forgiving in that sense, and if I'm just going to do this on a windowsill, so if I didn't have a garden, this would be an option. So seeds are now in there. I'm just going to give them a little dusting of compost just to cover them. It really doesn't need to be much. Just enough to cover them, tuck them in a little bit. In terms of what depth you're meant to plant seeds, you don't really want to plant them too deep. Really only want to plant them about as deep as the seed is, so roughly the size of the seed. So lettuce seeds are very fine, so they really don't need to be planted deep, just on the surface of the soil with a little light covering. And then we're going to give them a water. Okay, so I'm also going to plant up a modular tray, so I've pre-filled that with a wee bit of compost. Good idea if you give it a bit of a dunt down on your worktop, just to make sure that the pots are filled evenly. If they're not, add a bit more compost to each one, and then just give them a wee press down. You want a nice good firm contact between any seeds and the compost ultimately. I'm going to sow beetroot seeds in these ones, so there's a couple of options here. You could do one beetroot seed per module, that would be fine. You could also multi-sow. I quite like that method if you're a bit shorter space like I am often in my garden. So by doing that you get, instead of one plant per pot, you get maybe, well, depends on the seed, but beetroot I'm going to go with 3. They do grow quite big. And what that means is I'll trade off getting maybe a big beetroot for 3 smaller ones, but I'll get 3 times as many in the same space. And as the season, as they start to ripen and come ready and swell up, I can twist out the biggest of the 3 and leave the other 2 to continue growing, so you get more crop out of your ground ultimately. So you've got your seed there, seed tray, modules filled. So the next thing you need is just a little hole in the little dent in each one, just to place your seeds into. It doesn't need to be super deep. Rough rule of thumb is look at the size of the seed you're planting, and whatever the size of the seed is, that's roughly how deep you need to plant them. So you can see beetroot seed, it's a bit chunkier than lettuce seed that we did already. So these ones are quite easy to see, so I'm going to plant these in 3s. So just 3 into each module. And just give them a wee dunt down as you go. And we'll come back and cover them with a layer of compost just to tuck them in and keep them happy. The chunkier seeds are much easier to work with. You can see you can go quite quickly with them. If you had to do thousands of these, there's different devices you can buy if you're doing sort of market garden level vegetable growing. I'm not. I'm just doing back garden or allotment scale vegetable growing, so you know, I don't mind doing it by hand this way. It can be quite precise. I also quite like to be kind of hands-on with it. So there we go. Oops, 4 in that one, won't matter. You can always cull one as they emerge or just go with 4. You often find another good idea is just to check your seed viability before you start. Seeds do have a shelf life, and if you check the packet it'll tell you when you when they were packed and when you should sow them by. Now if they're well past their, I guess their best before date in that sense, if it's only a year or 2, it's worth chucking them into a tray en masse and just seeing which ones germinate. That way whatever ones do you can prick out and pot on into little pots. That way you know you've not wasted your time. However, if it's a good number of years past the sell by date, it's debatable whether it's worth it. You might find that nothing comes up, and I think I've already had that problem this year with some turnip seed that I've sown, which has germinated really well in previous years, but this year when I checked the packet it looked a bit too far out of date, I think, so schoolboy error on my part. So there we go, so we've got 3 seeds per module there, and a couple that have got 4 I think. So we'll just take a wee handful of compost, just tuck them in each module. Seeds need a few things to germinate. Typically that's warmth and water, and that's usually enough to get the vast majority of seeds going. There's a few that need a bit of light as well, but the majority of them don't need light. Just warmth and water. And at this time of the year, the temperatures can fluctuate quite savagely. Like today it's been pretty warm. There's a bit of a chilly edge to the wind, but I'm expecting tonight it's going to get pretty cold out here. So what I probably will do is take these trays into the house, and you can stack them as well if you're short on space. You can take one, this one I did already earlier today, you can just stack them like that. They'll germinate quite happily underneath each other. Again, save space, and then once they've started to germinate, you can basically kind of take them off at that point. Obviously you don't want to crush your seeds, and then move them somewhere warmer. For me this is my greenhouse, so I tend to run out of space rapid style out here. Another good thing that, or it's a good idea to do, is label your seeds once you've planted them. There's different ways you can do that. This year I'm using a mixture of, well, reusing some of the old plastic ones that I have. I have experimented with wooden lolly sticks. They're pretty good. They typically are only one use though, and what I have found with them is that more environmentally friendly though they are, once you've written on them and once you stuck them into a pot and it's been watered a good number of times, what you tend to find is with the action of sunlight and water and the moulds and things that quickly creep up the lolly stick is you go back not too far on and you find that they've pretty much been erased and you're like, great, no idea what I sowed there now. Plastic ones, you know, they will last a lot longer in that sense, so if you take care of them, they will serve you well. Whatever you're comfortable with, really. I've got these ones anyway, so I use them year in, year out. It's the same things I'm growing mostly. Another thing you can write onto them is the date that you sowed your seeds. That can be quite useful as well. It's quite surprising how quick time passes after sowing seeds sometimes, and you come back and you're thinking nothing's germinated. When did I sow those? Was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago? Particularly if you're going to crop successionally. So you know, you might want say 8 of these for example sown 1 week, so you don't want all your crops coming ready at the same time. So if you go back a week or 2 weeks later and you sow another 8 and then another 8 another week or 2 later and so on throughout the season, that means you'll have a kind of gradient of food being ready as you go. You won't get 2,000 beetroot all ready at one go and you're left with a bit of a headache as to what to do with 2,000 beetroot. If you're only getting 8 ready at a time, that's a lot easier to work with or eat. There's only so much beetroot one family can eat, or pickle, as I've discovered over the years. So once you've done that, seeds are in, tucked in, warm, labelled. Next thing you need to do is water them. Now, some folk like to give the compost a good soak before they sow seeds, let it drain for maybe sit for 20 minutes and drain. That's fine, it's a good idea. Other folk like to just put the compost in and give them a good water afterwards. Equally fine, both methods are fine. What you do want though is to give them a good soaking. So you don't want to be, if you can avoid it, you don't want to be coming back every morning and having to water them again, but you do need to keep an eye on them. You don't want them to dry out. Seeds need moisture to germinate. But you equally don't want too much or they'll rot. So there's a balance with all these things. You know, the most important thing is just to get on with it and do it. Don't agonise over it. Seeds want to grow. They're pretty tough generally. Like I say, as long as you keep them with you know, moist, warm, protected whilst they're small, you'll tend to find that everything goes well. So one other thing you can do if you want to increase your chances of germination. So it's getting better as time goes on now. It's getting a lot warmer in the days, but it is about different seeds require different temperatures to germinate. So some pretty quick and are quite happy at low temperatures. Peas, broad beans, spinach, beetroots aren't too bad either. However, others are a different end of the scale. Things like tomatoes, chili peppers, even some of the squashes and things. Ultimately, they can benefit from a bit of bottom heat. So some of those may need a temperature. It's kind of maybe like your average temperature now. It's maybe about 20 degrees. So you can kind of control that by using a little propagation tray. So that's just one you can get them quite cheap on Amazon. Plug them into the wall and it basically heats from the bottom, keeps your seed tray at the perfect temperature for germination for a lot of those seeds. That's a good strategy. The other thing you can do, particularly when it is a bit colder, and it's not a bad idea, just looking around, so I've got one here, is use a little propagator lid. So if you've got them, just pop them over your seed trays, and it's basically like a little mini greenhouse. And that just helps keep the temperature a bit higher during the day. So once you notice your seeds have germinated though, you do need to be careful. Sometimes what happens is that if you leave the lid on too long and the moisture content in the air and the humidity is too high inside that little greenhouse, particularly if it's inside another greenhouse, you can find your seeds look good one day and you go back the next day and they've all fallen over and mysteriously collapsed. And that's usually called damping off. It's like a fungal disease that's attacked the plants. It basically just rots the stem and they just all fall over. Quite dispiriting when that happens. So usually what I do is once the seeds have put on a wee bit of growth and they look pretty sturdy, and it's, you know, I'll take that lid off in the morning if it's a warm enough day and just leave them. A bit like these ones in the background. These are pea shoots that have already germinated, so I've taken the lid off those now, and they're growing away quite happily. So it kind of helps to avoid that problem. If it gets particularly cold at night in the greenhouse, I'll probably put a propagator lid back on them, or other seedlings. Peas are pretty tough though. They're not too bad. Quite happy with them so far.